Hey, what's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and I've got 5 albums for metalheads looking to get started with black metal. Now, this is a genre that was particularly difficult even for me to break into at first, as it is off-putting by design. That said, I feel like these albums act as a nice path of gradual exposure, melding more accessible elements with the more classic, dissonant sound of the advanced listens like Burzum and Dark Throne.
This sounds a demo tape from my band Pestacook, which means a horse is dead. Do you like it?
I don't know, we Toke.
Then I hate it.
That out of the way, let's get into it. Alright, let's start off with a relatively easy one here, and it is Dimmu Borgir with Enthroned Darkness Triumphant. Now, this is a band that kind of gets crap from the cult black metal crowd for going very mainstream, much more modern sound, much more polished now if you listen to their newer releases. I happen to love it. Not everybody does, but I try to pick a release from their older catalog that, again, has that balance where you get the symphonic elements. There's some really cool keyboards on here, a lot of just entrancing melodies, a lot of atmosphere, a lot of kind of gothic overtones and aesthetic. And it's just a really fun listen that still maintains some of the true raw nature of the roots of the genre. And they are Norwegian, and they were born from relatively the same time as a lot of the much more rougher bands that we're not necessarily going to go into on this list. But yeah, as far as things go, like, this is a good entry point. Dimmu Borgir was definitely a starting point for me. For me, it was actually much later with Death Cult Armageddon, but I eventually backtracked to this and really appreciate this album. You might also go with Spiritual Black Dimensions, but ultimately, I think if you want to pick something that is that nice segue into some of the rougher stuff, then this is a good one to go with. Alright, one of my personal favorite picks that doesn't necessarily get talked about as much on these lists, and it is Toke with Nodested. Not discussed as much, not exactly sure why. I got to catch him live in Portland a couple of years back, and I gotta say, it's to this day one of my favorite metal shows that I've ever gone to. Dude rocks the corpse paint, he's out there shirtless, just tearing it up. You can't beat him. But in any case, this album is another one where it's got the melodic elements. A lot of his tremolo lines have this kind of more mournful, sorrowful, soulful even sound to them. So even though he's still delivering those classic throaty black metal screeches, it ends up being like not this really intense experience. It's much more kind of, it takes you on a journey. There's sort of a folkiness to it with some of the rhythms and the drumming and the pace changes, and it just, the whole thing has this atmosphere of kind of being out in the woods and sort of appreciating nature. Fantastic all around. At this point, if I'm not mistaken, he was composing and performing all of the music by himself. So very impressive guitar work that I quite enjoy. I've always described him as kind of almost like a black metal version of like a guitar virtuoso. And then his vocals are really solid as well. So give Toke a listen, and all of his albums are really good, especially the first 4. I considered including Norig's Vapen instead, because that is another fantastic album a little bit later in his catalog, and it's got the classic banjo that shows up on it. But again, if you're trying to sort of work your way into the raw, more classic sound, then this is probably the way to go. Alright, and then we've got a big name here with Gorgoroth with Ad Majorum Satanis Gloriam. Excellent album. Really, I love all of Gorgoroth's early albums. If you backtrack from here to like the first 3, which I love all of them, they're definitely going to be a little bit harder for for the beginner, but this one has like stronger production, a little bit more of a modern sheen to it, but still just so aggressive and so intense. This is just pure, like, in your face, grab you by the throat kind of music. Gall's vocals on here are just utterly demented. Like, one of the most unrivaled black metal vocal performances of all time, I would probably say, and it's fitting to that cover of dude just getting his throat freaking ripped out by this guy's teeth. I believe that's a classical depiction of some actual Greek mythology or something. I'll have to look that up again. I've since forgotten. But in any case, this thing is just packed with amazing songs that will really just stick with you just for how ferocious they are. And Gal is still probably my favorite vocalist that Gorgoroth has had to date. So definitely give this one a listen. And hey, we're not finished yet, but if you're enjoying this video and you're interested in being kept up to date with the best and brightest metal albums and bands from the underground and above, then consider hitting that subscribe button down below. Alright, now we're really getting into some classics here. We've got Immortal with At the Heart of Winter. Another band where like every album of theirs has something to offer. I've got their entire discography on my shelf back here, and I love every one of them for different reasons. And I love the more raw, kind of thrashier stuff. But if, again, you want something a little bit more entry level, maybe something with a little bit more atmosphere, a little bit more melody, this is the one to go to. For my money, this is actually probably their best album of all time. And like I said, it's just got this very kind of epic, verbose kind of sound to it that is not necessarily there on really any album before or since. So it's a really special album, and I'd say it's still pretty accessible, even though it does actually kind of fall into like classic second wave albums. This one just kind of stands out and is an easier listen, I feel like, for most people to get into. But if you enjoy it, then definitely expand outwards in either direction, because their later stuff is really great from the more kind of thrashier side, and the early stuff is just raw and intense and just delightful. So check out Immortal for sure. Alright, and then last but not least, I had to end with an album that I absolutely adore and is a classic black metal album, but again, is still much more on the accessible side, and it is Emperor with In the Nightside Eclipse. As you can see, I love this album so much, I got this beautiful like digipack book folded version of it. Love reading about it. Love hearing the background from Isan, who is just, to this day, an incredible musician and has gone through so many kind of maturations and evolutions over the years. But it all really starts with this album. This is like the symphonic black metal album, kind of the first of its time, really, or at least the one where it really just exploded and became its own subgenre. And you've got all the tropes of classic second wave black metal in that the production's pretty raw, the screams are really harsh and abrasive, but then you've got this whole backdrop of just thematic, gorgeous synth and symphonic music that is just absolutely stunning. It's like a cool fantasy video game soundtrack or something backed up by these just absolutely wretched vocals. And to prove to you how much I love this album, it's actually the back patch on my vest. So I've got a full version of that gorgeous artwork. But yeah, I just can't say enough amazing things about this album. It is a must listen for sure. And I ended on it because, again, like, this is actually a classic and it'll really get you started. Like, I feel like by the time I worked my way over this album, I felt ready to venture into the more rough and dissonant side. It allowed me to segue into Bathory, Burzum, Darkthrone, Mayhem, all of that stuff. And like, this was sort of the key to unlock that stuff making sense, because prior to that, it all just sounded like noise to me, and now it doesn't, and I quite enjoy it. So that's my list. Those are my 5 black metal albums that I think will be a good job getting you started into the genre. But let me know down in the comments which one of these is your favorite, and which albums do you tend to recommend to your friends who are interested in trying out the genre, or say like, oh, what album should I start with? Like, I'm really curious to hear that. Let's get a discussion going down there. And also, don't go anywhere, because I got plenty more videos coming right after this one. I've built a playlist for this particular series, but I also have metal tier lists, album reviews of more recent underground albums, and also the podcast where I interview these people and have a great time learning about all the background of writing this music. Also in the description, you can find links to our social media, the email newsletter, our Patreon and Subscribestar if you want to make that extra jump to becoming a supporter. I'd really appreciate it. And metaltrenches.com, where you can find even more reviews and content. But that'll do it for this one. Flight of Icarus signing off. I'll see you in the trenches.
To Digitor.